Today, we're going to discuss why many investors believe XRP may currently be sitting at one of the most important price levels in its history. The market has been under heavy pressure. Sentiment has become extremely negative, and many traders are feeling frustrated by the recent price action. However, when we step back and look at the bigger picture, there are several indicators suggesting that this period could eventually be remembered as a major accumulation zone rather than simply another market downturn. I want to begin by talking about the charts because that is what most people are focused on right now. The reality is that watching prices move lower is never enjoyable. Anyone who has been involved in cryptocurrency for several years has experienced multiple bear markets, corrections, and major crashes. Every downturn feels different, and every downturn creates uncertainty. Yet, when we compare the current situation to some of the most painful moments in crypto history, there are several reasons why many long-term investors remain optimistic. If we look at XRP from a long-term perspective, the chart still appears constructive. The asset continues to trade above significant historical support areas and remains within a broader structure that many analysts interpret as a long-term accumulation phase. Instead of focusing solely on short-term weakness, some investors are paying attention to the possibility that XRP is building a foundation for a future move higher. The biggest concern for most people right now is the recent decline. Fear becomes strongest when prices fall and confidence disappears. However, one of the indicators receiving significant attention is the Relative Strength Index, commonly known as the RSI. Historically, XRP has rarely reached extremely oversold levels on this indicator. Whenever the RSI has dropped into these deeply oversold zones in the past, long-term investors have often viewed those moments as opportunities rather than reasons to panic. The reason this attracts attention is simple. Throughout XRP's history, periods of extreme pessimism have often been followed by periods of strong recovery. While no indicator guarantees future results, many investors use these historical patterns to help guide their decisions. When the market becomes excessively fearful, long-term participants frequently begin accumulating rather than selling. At the opposite end of the cycle, when excitement reaches extreme levels and everyone becomes convinced prices can only go higher, that is often when experienced traders begin reducing risk and taking profits. Markets move in cycles. They rise, they fall, they consolidate, and then they repeat the process. XRP has followed this pattern repeatedly throughout its history. Many investors believe that regardless of whether the next major move occurs in a few weeks, a few months, or a year from now, the broader trend remains intact. The expectation is not that XRP will move in a straight line upward. Instead, the expectation is that there will continue to be periods of volatility while the asset gradually forms higher lows and higher highs over time. One reason this current market environment feels particularly difficult is because there is no obvious negative event that fully explains the weakness. During previous crypto crashes, there were major headlines that investors could point to. There were exchange collapses, regulatory fears, project failures, and significant industry-wide crises. Investors could clearly identify the source of the panic. Today, many people struggle to identify a similar catalyst. There has not been a disaster comparable to some of the major events that shook the crypto industry in previous years. Because of that, the market decline feels confusing. Investors are watching prices fall without seeing a major event that appears capable of justifying such widespread fear. Ironically, some investors view this as a positive sign. Their argument is that if prices are declining without a major fundamental breakdown, then eventually market sentiment may correct itself. They believe the market is temporarily disconnected from the underlying developments taking place within the industry. This brings us to another important point. Many long-term XRP supporters argue that the fundamental thesis surrounding XRP has not materially changed. They believe the technology remains relevant, adoption continues to develop, and the long-term vision remains intact despite short-term volatility. Several market observers have pointed to historical indicators that suggest current conditions resemble some of the most significant market bottoms of the past. According to various analysts, multiple indicators are currently flashing signals that previously appeared during major bear market lows, including periods associated with the 2018 crypto crash, the pandemic-driven market collapse, and the aftermath of major industry failures in 2022. Many investors often look back and wish they had purchased more during previous downturns. When markets recover, people frequently talk about opportunities they missed. They remember periods of fear that later became profitable entry points. Because of this, some market participants believe the current environment could eventually be viewed in a similar way. The key argument from bullish investors is that the market appears to be heavily discounting assets despite the absence of major negative developments. Their position is that cryptocurrency valuations have become disconnected from the progress being made behind the scenes, and that eventually the market will adjust. Another factor attracting attention is the relationship between XRP and traditional finance. Rather than focusing solely on technical metrics or blockchain-specific measurements, some investors pay close attention to where companies position themselves within the broader financial ecosystem. One development that has generated discussion is Ripple's increasing visibility alongside major financial institutions. Supporters argue that Ripple has spent years building relationships within traditional finance and positioning itself in areas connected to payments, settlement systems, and financial infrastructure. The bullish case suggests that as financial institutions continue exploring blockchain technology, they may naturally become more familiar with companies already operating within their environment. XRP supporters believe this creates a unique advantage because Ripple has focused heavily on working with institutions rather than exclusively targeting retail users. The argument is not necessarily that every institution will immediately adopt XRP. Instead, supporters believe familiarity matters. When traditional financial firms begin examining digital assets, they may naturally pay attention to companies and technologies they already recognize and understand. This perspective becomes even more important when discussions shift toward tokenization, blockchain integration, and the modernization of financial infrastructure. Around the world, large financial organizations are exploring ways to improve efficiency, reduce costs, and streamline settlement processes through blockchain-based solutions. Supporters of XRP believe these developments create long-term opportunities. They point to the growing involvement of major financial institutions in blockchain initiatives and argue that the industry is gradually moving toward a future where digital assets play a larger role in global finance. Many people still do not fully understand how traditional financial systems operate, which makes it difficult for them to appreciate the significance of these developments. Concepts such as tokenization, digital settlement networks, and blockchain-based financial infrastructure remain unfamiliar to the average investor. Because of this knowledge gap, some investors believe the market is underestimating what could happen over the next decade. They compare the situation to early investment opportunities in major technology companies. At the beginning, very few people understood the long-term potential. Widespread recognition only arrived years later after significant growth had already occurred. Whether discussing Amazon, Nvidia, Tesla, or other successful companies, the pattern often looks similar. Early investors face skepticism. They endure volatility, criticism, and uncertainty before broader adoption eventually validates the thesis. XRP supporters argue that the same dynamic may be unfolding today. They acknowledge that nothing is guaranteed and that investing always involves risk. However, they believe the combination of institutional interest, blockchain adoption, financial modernization, and XRP's positioning within that environment creates a compelling long-term opportunity. Ultimately, every investor must make their own decision. Some will remain cautious, while others will view current prices as an attractive entry point. What matters most is understanding the difference between short-term market emotion and long-term conviction. The market will continue moving up and down. There will be periods of excitement and periods of fear. But for investors who believe in the long-term future of blockchain technology and XRP's role within that future, today's uncertainty may eventually be remembered as one of the most significant opportunities of this cycle. Only time will reveal the outcome. However, many long-term investors remain convinced that the story is far from over and that the developments occurring behind the scenes today could have a much greater impact on XRP's future than the temporary price weakness currently dominating headlines. Friends, that's all we have for you today. What is your opinion about today's video? Get involved and let us know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching.